Hello again. As the title says, today, that's the 17th of September 2024, that marks 10 years of the print and paste dungeon. Yeah, I know. So, anyway, as a bit of a change of pace, I thought we could take a look back at where it all started, and I can answer a few questions that I've received as well. But, obviously, before we start, you'll probably know that I've not been on YouTube quite that long. The first episode didn't appear until 2018, I think it was, in glorious 720p, but several years before that, in September 2014, I posted a short tutorial over on the blog where I showed how I made a few dungeon tiles, not surprisingly, by sticking paper printouts to bits of cardboard. I'll have a link to the original article in the description if you're interested. So that's the date that I'm basing all of this on. I was obviously working on the artwork before that, and I might have posted some work in progress pictures over on Google+. Anyone remember Google+? But I can't be sure. But like I say, the article appeared on the 17th, so that's when it was technically released, for want of a better word. Anyway, as I say, I was mainly just posting things over on the blog back then, to a very small audience, and I followed up the dungeon tiles with some pillars later that same month, a few tombs, some rubble, and the barrels and sacks the month after, and then some basic furniture in December. And that's pretty much all I had for a couple of years. There were still a few terrain tutorials appearing on the blog, but that was more traditional crafting, so things like scouring pad trees, vinyl tiles as dirt roads, chain link fences from oven mesh, and just random bits of scatter terrain. And the reason I bring these up now is because when I first started the channel, my original plan was to do the print and paste stuff alongside more, regular handcrafted terrain, probably leaning more into the handcrafted stuff actually. You can see some of that in this part of the original trailer that's playing in the background right now, as I somewhat foolishly thought I'd have time to do both. But yeah, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so the next time I got back to the print and paste stuff, that would be in April of 2017, and I made a few more bits and pieces with more written instructions over on the blog, which I was going to use at a gaming club that I used to go to. And even though I thought that game went okay, it was just a short mini campaign really, I didn't think much more about the DIY terrain side of things. Well, that's not entirely true. I did have a few more ideas, and I was probably half-heartedly thinking to myself that, maybe I should start a YouTube channel one day, but it was very much one of those pie-in-the-sky kind of things. It was something that was never likely to happen, as I'm not exactly the most outgoing of people. Anyway, at the end of that year, I just thought, what the hell, I'm gonna do it, and I think a large part of that was I'd been going through a lot of my mum's crafting stuff after she passed away. She used to make birthday cards, Christmas cards, and things like that, and I just tried to keep as much of that stuff as I could, stuff that I might be able to repurpose, and, just because. So that was a big part of it, I think, and I really did want to use some of this stuff, plus I also did genuinely think that I'd stumbled on a pretty good method of making dungeon terrain quick, easy, and cheap. It is largely by incorporating other people's ideas and mashing them all together, but I thought there were bound to be a few other people out there that would find it useful as well. Maybe not 21,000 people, but I was reasonably confident that if I stuck at it for a year or so, I might be able to get 1,000 subscribers. That would be more than enough for me to call it a success. I even did a giveaway when I got to 100 subscribers. That's how pleased I was about that. But yeah, I've also always tried to look at things from the perspective of 13-year-old me, if that makes sense. If 13-year-old me was just discovering D&D for the first time, and maps and miniatures and all that good stuff, and I didn't have much money to spare, I probably would have loved this stuff, so that's why I went with the pay-what-you-want approach, so, people can download the files for free if they like. I didn't want there to be any kind of barrier, apart from having access to a cheap printer, that is. And speaking of young, teenage me, I did try making similar things like this when I was a lot younger. For example, here's something I found in my dad's attic. It was probably drawn pixel by pixel in deluxe paint on an old Commodore Amiga, and then printed out on a dot matrix printer, and it somehow manages to both be not very good, but also kinda cool at the same time, and it just goes to show that I haven't really changed at all, have I? I've still not grown up, you might say. Anyway, as I say, I decided to make and release the first episode in January of 2018, and as you might expect, it's pretty terrible. I mean, my videos, they're quite repetitive and not that great now, to be honest, but they have got a bit better, I think. But yeah, as you know, I've been releasing videos now on a semi-regular basis ever since. Not as regular as I would like, but they are slowly building up, and the dungeon's come a long way since then. Anyway, I don't know if anyone is still watching at this point, but I did say that I was going to answer a few questions, so let's get started on those. Okay then, so Hello, I hope I got that right. They had a question about how I go about designing dungeons with regard to size, placing traps, number of rooms, and so on. Now, if you're referring to dungeon design in general, then I don't think I can really answer that in a few sentences, as people have wrote numerous books on the subject or have YouTube channels dedicated to that kind of thing. But if you're talking more about the terrain side of things, then I generally try to plan things around the space I think I'll have available at the table. I mean, nowadays I normally use a magnetic whiteboard, and I'll stick the tiles to that, so I'll try and plan most of my encounters with that in mind. For example, if you take a look at the map that I made for the Goblins adventure that I wrote, then I made sure I designed it in chunks almost. So there's 4 chunks, or encounter areas, that can be laid out individually. I mean, I'd love to be able to piece them all together and lay the dungeon out in its entirety, but I doubt I'll ever have the space to do that. Okay, next, Fishman asks what games I GM and how they influence the terrain I make. So for the past few years, I think the only RPG I've really run is D&D probably, though I have played in a few other systems. But I've also set things up for Rangers of Shadow Deep, 5 Parsecs Bug Hunt, and more recently 5 Leagues from the Borderlands. And as you would expect, they do influence what I make, as I'm generally making stuff that I want to use at some point. For example, all the recent Dwarven stuff, that came about because I wanted to run a Moria-themed game, using the 5 Leagues from the Borderlands rules. But like a lot of people, there's always plans to run and play more games, and I'm hoping to get some Shadow Dark to the table at some point. Right then, so Shannon asked how all of this got started, but I think I've covered most of that already, and was also wondering how big my collection is and what I wish I would have known when I first started. Well, I've probably got like around a dozen or so boxes that are roughly shoebox size, with the larger terrain pieces stored in them, and a similar amount of small compartmentalised boxes with all the scatter terrain, some of which are store-bought, others I've just made myself, because, as you can imagine, I've made a ton of stuff over the years, even though I've maybe only used around half of it so far. And regarding what I wish I would have known, I don't know really. If we're talking about techniques and tools and stuff like that, then I don't think I could just jump to where I am now without doing all the basic stuff first, so I don't really think there's anything I could change there, to be honest. I mean, there have been some mistakes along the way, but that's all part of the process. However, if we're talking in a more general sense, then I suppose, and this is going to sound a bit cheesy, I know, but I just wish I would have known how nice people would be. You wouldn't believe how nervous I was about putting myself out there on YouTube, but it turns out I really didn't have much to worry about, at least so far, so let's hope I haven't cursed it by saying that now. Okay, Nick asks how I started on the artistic side of things, and if any of it's hand-drawn, or if it's all created digitally. So, as you saw earlier with the little door that I showed, I've kind of always been fascinated with making dungeons and painting miniatures and stuff like that. Even when I was a kid, I would sketch out wilderness maps and town maps and dungeons. Not very good maps, but, maps all the same. I also had an uncle back then who worked for a printers, and every now and again he'd give me and my brother the end of a large roll of paper, so this thing would still have several metres of paper on it, and that was just the best thing ever for younger me. Nowadays though, I do most of the artwork, artwork inverted commas, on the computer. I'll usually start by drawing out the basic shapes in Inkscape first, that's like a vector graphics program, and then export that and add in all the details in Photoshop. Though I do still hand draw maps from time to time, and I have a couple of notebooks with basic sketches in for future terrain projects, but most of the final artwork, that's digital, which is not to be confused with AI. I don't use any AI images. Though I will also add that it's kind of funny that if we go way back to my school days, grades-wise, art, that was my worst subject. I think I got a GCSE grade E, which I think is like a grade 2 or 3 in modern terms. Anyway, now I'm going to have to apologise and say that I don't know how to pronounce this name, as I'll only butcher it, but they ask how I consider build difficulty and how I choose the materials that I use. And to tackle the last part first, I just tend to use what I have lying around. The kind of boxes that I get in the post, they come in all manner of sizes and thicknesses, and I just try to put all of that to use. So people don't really have to use the exact same stuff that I do. I suppose all you really need is some cereal box card, some single corrugated cardboard, and some double corrugated cardboard. And maybe some foam core. That's nice to have as well. Though it is harder to get some of these in different areas, but the idea really is just, try to make use of what's easy to get hold of. I don't really put much thought into it other than that, I'm afraid. Similarly, when it comes to the difficulty of the build, I don't usually set out with anything in mind other than how best to make it with limited materials. It's usually the nature of the piece itself that dictates how complex the build will be, but even then, I do try to keep it to as few steps as possible, but I don't always succeed with that. So, a bit of a non-answer, I'm afraid. Okay, next, Jamie would like to know more about the work that goes into designing the textures, my workflow, the tools I use, and if I'll ever make tutorials on that side of things. So again, I'll answer the last part first and say that I doubt I'll ever do art tutorials, for want of a better word, as while there are some techniques that I repeat, most pieces require that I just sit down and spend the time actually drawing them, albeit on the computer. I think there's sometimes a bit of a false assumption about doing stuff digitally that the computer does all the work, and while it definitely helps, and it's certainly true if you're using a dedicated or a commercial mapping program, I'm drawing everything from scratch, so if I need a door hinge that looks a particular way, I'll have to draw it. I might do an image search for something that's period appropriate first, but as I say, it's then just a matter of drawing out a shape that I like in Inkscape, and then making it look a little bit prettier in Photoshop. But when starting a new project, I'll sometimes have a basic idea sketched out first, though not always, and I'll sometimes make prototypes without any artwork or just basic line art, just to see if I've got the shapes roughly right, and then, when I'm happy with that, that's when I'll start on the textures themselves, though it's not always a perfect progression like that. Quite often, there's a bit of back and forth. And as for the other tools that I use, I put the videos together in Adobe Premiere Pro, but I record the audio for the voiceovers in Audacity, and I make good use of the noise reduction filter to cut out any background noise. But yeah, as far as the textures go, the main shapes are drawn in Inkscape, and I'll then make use of a ton of Photoshop layers. So each of the layers for the door handles that you can see here, they've been drawn separately, just basic shapes for the most part, and I'll then build up the details layer by layer until I get the desired effect. And like I say, that's going to change for each piece that I make, so there's no real catch-all method that works for everything, I'm sorry to say. Next, Patrick has asked if I'm a GM or a player, and if I have any favourite PCs or NPCs. So I do both, and I enjoy both. At the moment, I'm probably playing more than GMing in my in-person group, but GMing slightly more than I'm playing in my online group, if that makes sense. But as I mentioned earlier, I also play some co-op games as well, like Rangers of Shadowdeep. And as far as favourite characters go, that's usually the one that you're playing at the moment, isn't it? So in the in-person campaign that's coming to a close soon, I've been playing a gnome druid with anger issues. He's actually a barbarian with some nature skills, and in the longest running online game where I'm a player, I've got a grim dwarf cleric who definitely doesn't have any Duergar ancestors. That's just a vicious rumour. Right then, so Tim asks if there's any glues that I don't recommend, and the answer is yes. Most of the time it doesn't really matter, but the glue sticks that I got from Hobbycraft, they're just terrible. I don't know if it was a bad batch or what. I mean, you always get a little bit sticky when using glue sticks. It's kind of unavoidable, but these just seem to get everything sticky, and I don't know why that is. I mean, it's not like I'm new to all of this, so I don't think it's user error, but they're just horrible to work with. And now that I've said that, I suppose there goes any chance of a sponsorship that I might have had with Hobbycraft in the future. Anyway, he also asks if there's a trick or a hack that I wish I'd known earlier. And that's a bit similar to an earlier question, but if I'm going to have to come up with an answer, then it's actually going to be something that someone else posted. I think it was on the Facebook group, or it could have been Discord, I can't remember. But that was to use snowflake punches to make little bushes. And the main reason for that is because, as I mentioned earlier, when my mum passed away and I inherited most of her craft stuff, I gave a ton of that kind of thing away, as I didn't think I could make much use of them. So I'm not annoyed by the fact that I've gone out and basically bought the same things again. I'm just kind of kicking myself as I could have kept more stuff. It's a silly sentimental thing, really. But yeah, since I just mentioned the Facebook group and the Discord, there's always people coming up with new and inventive ways of putting the textures to use over there. So if that kind of thing's of interest, then, it might be worth joining one of those. Okay, Kenny asks, do I prefer to run games or be a player? And if I have any favourite podcasts and the like. So, as I said earlier, I like both, probably about the same amount each. I think I just enjoy everything about the hobby, really, even the prep work that goes into GMing. I like making the maps, I enjoy painting and collecting miniatures, collecting books, coming up with interesting encounters, NPCs, world building, and, not surprisingly, making the terrain. And as for podcasts and stuff like that, I don't really watch or listen to any in particular on a regular basis, though I might sometimes find a character creation session or an episode or two of gameplay for a game or a book that I might be interested in, but that's more to get a feel for things than anything else. I have tried watching a few episodes of some of the big channels that do that kind of thing, but it's not really for me, I don't think. If I'm doing something that doesn't require my full attention, like drawing bricks and dirt, which I seem to do quite a lot of, most of the time, I'd rather just listen to an audiobook. That's just me. Okay, now, Benjamin has a few questions, so I'll try and go through them in order. What software do I use for editing? That's Adobe Premiere Pro. Do the games I run inspire the terrain that I make, or does the terrain that I make inspire the games that I run? It's a bit of both, really. If we ignore all the stereotypical dungeon stuff that, everyone makes, then I sometimes just make stuff because I have a cool idea in my head for a new project, and I then try and think of interesting encounters to accompany it after the fact. Other times, I might be getting ready to run a scenario that needs something in particular, and I then have to go away and figure out how to make it. Okay, what kind of system did I use prior to the print and paste stuff? I've used all sorts, really. Everything from the old classic dungeon floor tiles from Games Workshop, homemade stuff when I was a kid, tiles made with plaster of Paris dungeon moulds, wet and dry erase mats, all sorts, really. Even now, I'll still sometimes mix and match. What's the best seller? As far as the print and paste stuff goes, it's the very first one. It's been out the longest, so it's got that going for it, and I'm guessing that if someone is going to start making this stuff, then they'll probably start at the beginning. They might give up or move on to something else after a while, but they'll probably start from episode 1. Which one of my designs has surprised me the most? If by that you mean which one worked out better than expected, then it might be the flames. They're pretty easy to make, and from a distance they don't look too dissimilar to actual flames. Another one might be the standing stones. Not the stones themselves, but the technique of using masking tape to bulk them out a bit. That worked out pretty well. Oh, and the tiny bottles. I've used those in a ton of projects. And his final question is, how do I store this stuff? But I think I covered that a bit earlier. So, yeah, those are all the questions that I received, and I hope I've done a reasonable job of answering them. And by coincidence, my own little anniversary, that lines up with the release of the new D&D Player's Handbook. So, since my Goblins adventure, the one that I mentioned a bit earlier in the video, that's technically kind of for an older edition now. That was written a few years ago for original 5e, not the new but not new edition. I don't know why they just can't call it 5.5 and be done with it, but what I'm trying to say is, since that adventure is technically for an older version of the game, I'm going to switch it over from being a paid product to a pay-what-you-want product. Though, don't get too excited, as it is meant just to be a pretty straightforward starter adventure. So, it's very much just, let's go fight some goblins, but I think it's okay. So, if you'd like to pick that up, then I'll put a link to it in the description. And I think that's about all I've got to say, so thanks for watching as always, and thank you very much to everyone that supports the channel in one way or another, whether that's financially through drive-thru or Patreon, or whether it's just liking and commenting on the videos. It all adds up and it all helps. So yeah, bye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.